There is a single word that changes everything in manifestation, and most people never understand what it truly means. That word is feeling. Across countless spiritual searches, through affirmations and visualizations, many have tried to create change, yet the change never comes. Why does this happen when the instruction seems so simple? The answer lies in a subtle but devastating confusion between feeling and emotion. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this distinction is not philosophical. It is the difference between manifestation and perpetual frustration. Emotion is what most people chase. Feeling is what the subconscious accepts as truth. When someone finally grasps this, everything shifts. How many times has excitement been mistaken for the state itself? How often has someone felt joy, hope, or enthusiasm about a desire, only to watch it never arrive? The confusion runs deep because the language itself seems to invite misunderstanding. When Neville spoke of feeling, he was not referring to the surge of happiness or the wave of relief that comes when something external happens. He was pointing to something far more subtle and infinitely more powerful. He was describing the silent inner knowing, the assumptive state where the desire is no longer wanted because it is already possessed within consciousness. This is not an emotion that rises and falls. This is the groundwork of reality itself. Emotion is reactionary. Feeling, as Neville taught it, is declarative. Emotion responds to what appears to be happening outside. Feeling creates what happens outside by accepting it as already true inside. Emotion asks, pleads, and hopes. Feeling assumes, accepts, and rests. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this was the revolution that changed how manifestation could be understood. The subconscious mind does not respond to emotional intensity. It responds to conviction. It responds to the quiet certainty that something already is. That certainty is not loud. It is not dramatic. It simply exists, naturally, the way possession always feels. What does it feel like to already have what is desired? Not the moment of receiving it, but the calm, ordinary state of already living with it as fact. That is the feeling Neville referred to. It is the same naturalness with which anyone feels about the home they live in, the name they carry, or the body they inhabit. There is no effort in that feeling. There is no performance. There is simply the assumption that it is so, and that assumption shapes every thought, every action, and every response that follows. When someone chases emotion, they remain in the state of wanting. When someone embodies the feeling of already being, they enter the state where creation occurs. The detail that changes everything is this: the subconscious does not care about emotional peaks. It cares about what is felt to be true consistently. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, he made it clear that to impress the subconscious with a desired state, one must assume the feeling that would be theirs had they already realized the wish. Not the thrill of the wish coming true, but the settled, peaceful knowing that it already has. That is the secret. That is the detail most miss. And that is why, for so many, manifestation remains a mystery while for others, it becomes as natural as breathing. Consciousness is not something separate from the person seeking change. Consciousness is the foundation, the substance, and the mechanism through which all things appear. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this was stated with absolute clarity. Consciousness is the only reality. Not symbolically. Not metaphorically. Literally. What is felt within consciousness as true will, without exception, express itself outwardly as experience. The world does not shape consciousness. Consciousness shapes the world. This inversion of belief is where transformation begins. When someone realizes they are not at the mercy of external conditions but are the very cause of them, everything changes. What happens when this is truly understood? The search stops. The begging stops. The desperation to manipulate circumstances dissolves because the person realizes that circumstances are effects, not causes. Joe Dispenza speaks of this through the lens of neuroscience, explaining that the brain does not distinguish between what is vividly imagined and what is physically experienced. When someone assumes a state internally with conviction, the brain begins to fire and wire in alignment with that state. The body responds. The behavior shifts. The environment reorganizes. All of this begins not with action, but with the silent assumption of a new identity within consciousness. Most people live from the outside in. They wait for circumstances to change so they can feel differently. They wait for evidence before they believe. They wait for permission from the world to become who they wish to be. But in the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, the instruction is the opposite. Live from the inside out. Assume the state first. Feel it as true first. Let the inner conviction precede the outer expression. This is not wishful thinking. This is the mechanics of creation. The subconscious mind, which controls more than 90% of all behavior and perception, does not argue. It accepts. And what it accepts as true, it proceeds to express. How does one shift from emotion to feeling? By stopping the attempt to generate excitement and starting the practice of assumption. Assumption is not effort. Assumption is rest. It is the quiet acceptance that something already is. Think of how it feels to be in a room that is familiar. There is no question about whether the room exists. There is no effort to convince oneself of its reality. It simply is, and that is felt naturally. That same quality of naturalness is what must be brought to the desired state. Not force. Not performance. Just the calm, ordinary sense that it is already so. The difference between those who manifest consistently and those who struggle endlessly is not in their desire, their worthiness, or even their technique. The difference is in their state. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, he emphasized that a state is not a mood. A state is a position in consciousness. It is the lens through which everything is interpreted. When someone occupies the state of already being what they wish to be, their thoughts, their speech, their decisions, and their responses all align with that state automatically. They do not have to force positivity. They do not have to deny difficulty. They simply see from a different place, and from that place, a different reality unfolds. The subconscious mind is not logical. It does not reason. It does not judge. It accepts as fact whatever is consistently impressed upon it with a feeling of truth. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this principle was taught as the foundation of all manifestation. The subconscious does not care whether what is felt is based on external evidence or internal assumption. It simply takes what is felt to be true and begins to externalize it as experience. This is why two people in identical circumstances can have vastly different lives. They are not living in the same reality. They are living in the reality that matches their inner state. What does this mean for someone who has been affirming, visualizing, and trying to manifest but seeing no results? It means they have been operating from emotion rather than feeling. They have been trying to convince the subconscious through effort, repetition, and intensity. But the subconscious is not convinced by effort. It is convinced by naturalness. It is convinced by the quiet, consistent assumption that something already is. When someone says affirmations while feeling lack, the subconscious registers the lack, not the words. When someone visualizes while emotionally chasing the desire, the subconscious registers the chase, not the fulfillment. Feeling is what the subconscious listens to, always. Joe Dispenza explains that the body is the subconscious mind. Every thought that is felt emotionally becomes chemistry in the body, and that chemistry reinforces the state. When someone consistently feels the anxiety of not having, the body becomes conditioned to that state. The nervous system, the hormones, the cellular memory, all align with lack. When someone consistently feels the naturalness of already being, the body begins to align with that instead. The shift is not intellectual. It is biological. It is the reason why assumption, when truly embodied, creates change that seems miraculous but is actually lawful. How can someone know if they are in the state of the wish fulfilled or merely hoping for it? The answer is simple: naturalness. If there is strain, there is not assumption. If there is longing, there is not possession. If there is convincing, there is not belief. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, he described the state of the wish fulfilled as the quiet calm that comes when something is simply accepted as done. There is no need to affirm it repeatedly because it is already known. There is no need to visualize it obsessively because it is already familiar. There is only the peaceful, ordinary sense that it is so. What happens when someone truly occupies that state? The outer world begins to shift. Not because the world is being manipulated, but because the person is now perceiving and responding from a different place. They no longer seek. They no longer beg. They no longer react from lack. Their behavior changes. Their decisions change. The opportunities they notice change. The people who respond to them change. Everything reorganizes to match the state they have assumed within. This is not magic. This is consciousness expressing itself through law. And the law is always this: what is felt within as true will be experienced without as fact. In Proverbs chapter 23, versiculo 7, there is a statement that unlocks the entire mechanics of manifestation. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Each word of this verse carries immense weight when understood through the lens of consciousness. As he thinketh does not refer to the surface thoughts that pass through the mind casually. It refers to the deep, felt assumptions held in the heart, the subconscious. In his heart points to the place where belief resides, not as intellectual agreement but as inner conviction. So is he confirms that what is held within as truth becomes the person's entire reality, their identity, their experience, and their world. This is not poetry. This is instruction. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, he returned to this verse repeatedly because it validates everything he taught about the power of assumption. What a person feels themselves to be in the depths of their consciousness, they become. Not eventually. Not conditionally. Immediately, in the only place that matters, within. And from that inner state, the outer world arranges itself to reflect it. The verse does not say, as circumstances shape him, so is he. It says, as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. The direction is clear. The cause is within. The effect is without. How many people live as though the reverse were true? How many wait for the world to change so they can think differently, feel differently, be differently? They place the power outside themselves, believing that conditions must shift before they can assume the state they desire. But the verse reveals the opposite. The state must be assumed first, in the heart, in the subconscious, as a quiet inner knowing. Only then does the outer world have anything to reflect. This is why effort without inner change produces nothing. This is why striving without assumption leads to exhaustion. The heart must shift first. The feeling must be established first. Everything else follows. What does it mean to think in the heart? It means to accept something so deeply that it becomes felt as true without question. It is not about repeating thoughts. It is about embodying conviction. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, he described this as dwelling in the state, as living from the end, as feeling oneself to already be what is desired. When that inner acceptance is genuine, when it is natural and effortless, the transformation is already complete within. And because consciousness is the only reality, what is complete within must express itself without. There is no exception to this law. The pain so many carry comes from thinking in the heart from lack, from unworthiness, from fear, from limitation. And because the law is impartial, that is what they experience. But the moment someone shifts what they think in their heart, the moment they assume the feeling of already being fulfilled, whole, and free, the law begins to work in their favor. Not because they deserved it more or because circumstances finally allowed it, but because they changed the only thing that was ever creating their reality, the state they occupied within. That is the power this verse points to. That is the secret hidden in plain sight for anyone willing to see it. When the distinction between feeling and emotion is finally understood, everything about manifestation becomes clear. The reason so many techniques fail is not because the techniques themselves are flawed, but because they are being applied from the wrong state. Affirmations spoken while feeling lack only reinforce the lack. Visualizations performed while chasing the desire only deepen the sense of separation from it. The subconscious does not hear the words or see the images. It feels the state from which they arise. And it is that state, not the method, that determines what manifests. What changes when someone begins to operate from feeling rather than emotion? Everything. The frantic energy disappears. The need to control circumstances fades. The obsessive monitoring of progress stops. Why? Because when someone genuinely feels themselves to already be what they desire, there is nothing left to chase. There is only the natural unfolding of what has already been accepted as true within. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, this was described as living from the end. Not hoping for the end. Not working toward the end. Living from it, as though it is already accomplished, because within consciousness, it is. Consider someone who desires financial freedom. If they approach this desire from emotion, they will feel excitement when they think about money, anxiety when they check their bank account, and frustration when circumstances do not immediately reflect their wish. All of these emotions reinforce the state of not having. But if they approach this desire from feeling, they assume the quiet naturalness of already being financially free. They do not force excitement. They do not perform gratitude. They simply rest in the inner knowing that it is already so. From that state, their decisions shift. Their perception shifts. Their entire relationship with money shifts. And the outer world begins to reflect the state they have claimed within. This is not about pretending. This is not about denying current circumstances. This is about understanding that circumstances are always effects, never causes. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, he taught that the outer world is a shadow, and consciousness is the substance casting it. To change the shadow, one must change the substance. To change the outer reality, one must change the inner state. And the way to change the inner state is not through effort, but through assumption. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Dwell in it. Let it become familiar. Let it become natural. Let it become who you are. What happens when this is done consistently? The subconscious, which controls perception, behavior, and attraction, begins to operate from the new state. Opportunities that were invisible before suddenly appear. Decisions that seemed impossible before become obvious. Relationships that were stagnant before shift. Not because the world changed arbitrarily, but because the person changed the lens through which they were experiencing the world. They stopped reacting from lack and started responding from fulfillment. And in that shift, everything transformed. This is the application. This is how the teaching moves from concept to experience. This is where manifestation becomes inevitable. The moment someone truly grasps that feeling is not emotion, their entire spiritual journey shifts from seeking to embodying. For years, perhaps decades, the search may have been about finding the right technique, the right teacher, the right method. But the truth was never hidden in a technique. The truth was always this: consciousness creates reality, and the way consciousness creates is through the state it assumes as true. That state is not a passing mood. It is not a temporary emotion. It is the deep, felt sense of identity from which all perception and experience flow. What does it mean to live as consciousness rather than as a body reacting to circumstances? It means recognizing that nothing outside has power unless it is first accepted within. A diagnosis, a rejection, a financial loss, a betrayal, none of these have meaning in themselves. They only have the meaning and the power that consciousness assigns to them. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, he taught that the outer world is neutral. It is the inner state that gives it color, weight, and consequence. When someone lives as consciousness, they stop being victims of circumstance and become creators of experience. Not through control, but through assumption. Think of the body as a vessel, the mind as a tool, and consciousness as the true self. The body feels sensations. The mind generates thoughts. But consciousness chooses which state to occupy, and from that state, everything else follows. When someone assumes the state of health, the body begins to respond. When someone assumes the state of abundance, the mind begins to perceive opportunities. When someone assumes the state of love, relationships begin to reflect that love. This is not wishful thinking. This is the lawful relationship between inner state and outer expression. The body and mind are instruments. Consciousness is the musician. How does someone know they have truly shifted states? By noticing what feels natural. When the desired state no longer requires effort to maintain, when it no longer feels like pretending or convincing, when it simply is, that is when the shift has occurred. That is when the subconscious has accepted it as true. That is when manifestation becomes inevitable. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, he called this the Sabbath, the rest that comes when the work is done within. Not rest from physical labor, but rest from mental striving. The state has been assumed. The feeling has been established. All that remains is to let it unfold. What if everything that has been sought externally is already present internally, waiting only to be claimed? What if the abundance, the love, the peace, the freedom, all of it, exists now within consciousness, and the only thing preventing its expression is the refusal to feel it as true. This is the deepest revelation. This is the invitation. Not to seek anymore. Not to wait anymore. But to assume, to feel, to embody the state of already being what is desired. And from that inner fullness, to watch as the outer world transforms to match it. This is not theory. This is the law. And the law is always faithful. There is a practice that makes this entire teaching tangible, and it requires nothing but willingness to assume a new state. Before sleep, when the conscious mind begins to quiet and the subconscious becomes most receptive, there is an opportunity to impress it with the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not through effort, but through gentle assumption. Lie still. Let the body relax completely. Then, instead of reviewing the day that was, step into the reality that is desired. Not as something far away, but as something already present. Feel it. Not the emotion of receiving it, but the quiet naturalness of already living it. What would it feel like to fall asleep already being the person who has what is desired? Not hoping for it. Not working toward it. Simply being it. That feeling, subtle, peaceful, ordinary, is what the subconscious accepts as instruction. The subconscious does not argue. It does not question. It simply takes what is felt as true and begins to externalize it. In the lessons I learned reading the works of Neville Goddard, he taught that this drowsy state before sleep is the most powerful time to impress the subconscious because the critical mind is suspended. What is felt in that moment sinks deeply, and from that depth, it begins to shape waking reality. This is not about creating elaborate scenes or forcing vivid visualizations. This is about resting in the feeling. If the desire is health, feel the naturalness of being healthy. If the desire is love, feel the calm satisfaction of being loved. If the desire is freedom, feel the quiet peace of already being free. Let that feeling be the last thing carried into sleep. Let it be the atmosphere in which consciousness rests. From that rest, everything begins to shift. Not because of the technique, but because of the state that has been assumed and accepted as true. For those who resonate with this teaching, there is an invitation to go deeper, to explore more of these truths, to receive guidance on how to live from consciousness rather than circumstance. Consider subscribing and allowing these insights to become a steady presence. The bell icon ensures that each new teaching reaches those who are ready to hear it. And for those who feel called to share this message, know that doing so is not just generosity, it is an act of co-creation. When truth is shared, it multiplies. When someone passes this understanding to another who is searching, they are participating in the awakening of consciousness itself. What if the entire search has been leading to this one realization? That feeling is not emotion, that the subconscious responds only to what is felt as true, and that the power to change everything has always been within. What if there is nothing left to seek, nothing left to fix, nothing left to earn, only a state to assume and a feeling to embody? This is the secret that has been hidden in plain sight. This is the teaching that transforms everything. Not because it is complex, but because it is true. And truth, when finally recognized and lived, becomes the foundation of a reality that reflects the fullness of what has always been within. Consciousness is the cause. Feeling is the method. Manifestation is the inevitable result.